Um, the reason we're here today is because apparently family offices are things that health science, health care entrepreneurs like. Not exactly sure why. Okay, there are theories behind it, but I want to take the opportunity to at least showcase some of the diversity that is in our sector, investor sector. We have here 4 great panelists that we'll introduce in a second. I hope that we can talk about some of the motivation for each office to invest in healthcare. It's a kind of a tough sector, but maybe there's a reason. Some of the approach that each office uses to evaluate and close deals.
Good afternoon, everyone. We have a new set of panels starting at 2 p.m. As a reminder, at track 1, we have the Family Offices Investors panel. Track 2, we have no panel, and at track 4, the panel is ongoing. And if you haven't checked out the Innovation Challenge companies and the exhibition tables yet, please feel free to browse around and invest in the companies that you think are the most innovative.
Thank you. So we're in the right place. And finally, in addition to the approach, I think it's important to emphasize what kind of support that each office can provide beyond just capital. There is always a need to prepare for the next funding round, and I think it would be beneficial for startups to really understand what value add each office can provide beyond just green dots. So without further ado, like I said, I'm Ron Palivoda from the Palivoda Group. We are based here in New York City. We focus on early stage investments through our ventures arm. Specifically in healthcare, we have a dedicated evergreen fund called the Health Tech Fund. We're not that creative in terms of naming our funds. So the Health Tech Fund focuses on health technology, specifically ways to reduce the cost of healthcare. Taking an innovation and scaling it up, democratizing that innovation. We look at projects that can leverage big data, projects that can add value to our existing portfolio, kind of a bolt-on situation. For example, we are active in genotype diagnostics in the genomics space, looking at molecular diagnostics. We also have an interest in digital biomarkers, ways to monitor remotely patient health and wellness. So if there is interest, if there's alignment, please let me know at the end. Give me a card, I'll give you my card, and we'll try to connect. Without further ado, on my left, we have Kevin.
Yep. So I'm Kevin Schimmelfinick. I'm a managing partner of McGeever. We're a family office in Raleigh, North Carolina. We invest in companies at or just after commercialization. We also fundamentally go after existing product lines and portfolios in large multinational conglomerates and pull those down. And where it gets complementary to the early stage companies is sometimes those product lines or those business units aren't that exciting to a big company, but when we can find a $100 million business we can invest in, it's very exciting, because then we can go out and find folks like yourself and find a product we can bolt on that $100 million business. Because our model we're seeing out in the marketplace, the big companies are ignoring the little deals because they can't get earnings per share to move. So we find that as a sweet spot. As a business, we have about 45 active direct investments, wide variety and range. Our investment appetite is anywhere from early angel activities to north of $500 million. So we have a wide variety. We also have several positions in limited partnerships with private equity firms and have done deals directly with major conglomerates. Our expertise is in commercialization, so we actually own one of our holdings, is a company called Salesforce for Hire, and the whole purpose is that comes in and helps accelerate commercialization, because we believe there's a huge world between a great idea and actual revenue generating idea. And so that's where we focus on our specialty. My background is I've been in the medical device space for about 25 years, so we stay in that space. The product categories we dealt with are capital consumable. We've also done implantable. Pretty much everything you can do inside a patient or around the patient supports the patient. We've also looked at the ecosystem holistically, so we've done deals with insurance providers, hospital systems, distributors, GPOs. So when we look at the business, we look at it not just in your product in a category you're solving therapeutically, we also look at how it's going to fit in the ecosystem as well. So that's my background.
Chuck Stetson, I'm the CEO, third generation of the Stetson family office. My grandfather started in 1918. And I've been doing venture capital really since 1978. We've been doing recently a lot of in the healthcare space, but we sort of stepped back and we were looking at the private equity financing for healthcare, and the system is very broke, as all of you probably know. And so we also looked at one of the solutions, I think, is the family offices, which have sort of emerged from their shell, like we have emerged from our shell the last couple of years. And so we started out mapping early stage healthcare financing. We started out initially in the US, but we spent a lot of time in Asia and the Gulf States and Europe. And we're finding it in a very similar pattern. There are a lot of family offices that want to get involved in investing in early stage healthcare. They don't really know how to go about it, and they're scared as can be. There are just pockets of people that have invested in Theranos, which was a fraud, and Rupert Murdoch lost $110 million because it wasn't properly vetted and the like. So we think that there's, as we spotted what was going on out there, we came across a couple of other things. The dearth of capital outside of Silicon Valley and Boston. There are 77,000 plus life science companies. 86% are outside of California and Massachusetts. We get 42% of the financing. Is something wrong with these numbers? I think so. But there's a lot of really interesting stuff that's happening away from Boston and away from Silicon Valley. In Boston, just up in Kendall Square, they're going for $100 a square foot for space. Wow, that's almost double what we're paying here in New York, and I thought New York was expensive. So I don't know how you start companies with that kind of expense. And overall, in the outside of Boston and Silicon Valley, the costs are about 35% less. And when you're actually starting companies and you're not going to have any revenue for a while, when you want to have a little bit more efficient capital. And the real question is, there needs to be a little bit more infrastructure, but there's amazing stuff going on. For example, in St. Louis, they have Washington University bought up 200 acres. We now have 7 incubators with 250 companies, soon to be 400 companies, startups, and about a third of them are healthcare. So it's really kind of amazing. I'll just sort of wrap on this. Talk about it more, but in St. Louis they have a buyer generator that has invested $17 million with philanthropic dollars, and that's what we're doing. We're bringing philanthropic dollars to the table around the globe, and people are really excited about that. They invested $17 million in philanthropic dollars in 65 companies. They were able to attract $530 million of private capital. It's a 30-to-1 ratio. And so what we're doing is we're building a global bioforum network. We've had meetings for family offices in Phoenix, Tucson, St. Louis, and Brisbane, Australia. And we have ones in the next couple of months in Seattle, Vancouver, Geneva, and Singapore.
Hi, my name is Sherry Greiswood. I'm the Chief Investment Officer for Knoxville Asset Management. And we're about at the opposite end of the spectrum as you can get. We're a newly formed single-family office. It's a first-generation wealth-based family office. And in our case, the interest here is to give back to the community, if you will. The wealth was created through alternative investments and physical commodities. And the members wanted to do something to give back for that opportunity. It's fortunate for me to be involved. Fortunately, I've known the family for a very long time. But I have had half my career as a research analyst on the sell side and the other half as a banker. So at an early stage fund such as this, it's helpful to them to have somebody who's been on both sides of the street, so to speak. With regard to some details about our fund, we're co-located in Maryland and New Jersey. The members' interest is really in transformative and disruptive medical science. Looking at opportunities that are approaching long unmet needs or intractable disease with completely out-of-the-box thinking. We're looking at more specifically companies whose strategies incorporate risk mitigation to the clinical trial process. So we're looking at, interested in companies who understand how to use adaptive trial design as an example, to use comparative biology at the translational phase of medicine to better inform earlier stage human trials. And with regard to that, the indications, we see these innovative strategies focused on our gene therapy, other uses for nucleic acids, both as direct nucleic acids or biomimetic nucleic acids. We're looking at rare diseases, CNS, veterinary biotech, which we think is an increasingly important area because of the translational implications to reduce clinical trial failure. And the other area that we think we can find unique opportunities is devices which are able to address druggable targets or supplant the use of drugs. And in particular, a case of example of that would be the opioid crisis, and using forms of neurostimulation or electrical stimulation as an example to supplant the use of drugs in these markets. And with any family office at its origin, I'm sure there's an emotional or personal connection to the opportunities they're interested in, and that's what my family office is most involved in, something that touches them personally.
Hi, I'm Mark Roner. I'm a VP at Sopris Capital. Sopris is based here in New York. We're a single family office founded by Andy Paul, founded it in 2002. We're a little bit different from the other panelists here. We only invest in digital health and healthcare services, so we're not your biotech or med device investor. Sorry to let some of you down. We tend to focus on companies that are at least $1 million in revenue, anywhere from $1 to $10 million of recurring revenue. We invest anywhere from $2 to $5 million in these companies. We're not your typical investor that might do 10 deals per year. We're pretty selective. We pick 1 to 2 deals a year, and we really want to partner with the management teams where we're sitting on the board to offer advice that way, through advice, general company building, through introductions. We name it. We've got about 12 portfolio companies. That's about it.
Okay, so when I say diversity, I meant it. Okay, we got old school, 99 plus years. We got brand new out of the box in New Jersey. We got health care IT. We got biotech. We got medtech. We're all over the place. So in terms of discussing topics on a family offices panel, it's going to be a little difficult to just, come to a consensus. Every office is going to run differently. But I wanted to take an opportunity now to think about, first of all, from the audience, by show of hands, who have you actually approached a family office before? Okay, so we have 5–10%. Now, another show of hands, who has wanted to approach a family office, but for one reason or another didn't know how to approach a family office? Okay, so let's start off with this. Did you guys, I'm sure you're approaching venture capital firms, right? So first question is, how is a family office approaching a family office different than approaching a venture capital firm? Is there any difference?
Sure, I'll start. Yeah, it's absolutely different. So if you're going to call me randomly, I'm not going to take that call. We actually are the opposite. We don't want anyone to know who we are. So the world we play, at least I'm speaking for myself and let you all speak yourself, but it's more about not knowing what's going on than sharing. Because once someone knows you have money, give an example, the minute we signed up for this, I think I got several hundred requests for meetings. And while I get it, I absolutely want to meet with everyone, there's just no way possible. And so it becomes a very difficult thing, but if you can, try to figure out some connection. And what works is a phone call from a peer, or the folks I've been on a panel with, I may have met, they say, hey, this is something that fits your portfolio, you may have an interest, the conversation goes a little bit easier. I will also say that we look very specifically at certain things at certain times, and we can't necessarily divulge why. As I said earlier, we're looking at buying product lines out of existing multi-billion-dollar companies, And then we're going to go and add some what I'll call complementary businesses to leverage that channel. So if you're talking to us at a time when we're in the middle of doing a bigger deal, we may ignore an early deal and you can't understand why we're not looking at it. And it's got nothing to do with your business. Your business can be terrific. So I think those are some of the combination things of trying to understand. You know, I know from my days of dealing with venture capital stuff, a lot of times you'll ask them, where are you at in the fund and how much cash do you have? It's a great question you can ask a venture capitalist before you go take a meeting. Because sometimes in my past I've bumped into them and there's really good ones and really bad ones. And some of the ones that were bad were actually just using it for free research. They'd have a meeting with you and suck in your information. We don't want to do that. You know, again, we want to treat entrepreneurs respectfully because ultimately they're really good people and the world needs more of them. So in our perspective, just making sure you know where we are at the time that's going on. And I absolutely encourage you to get some type of lead or some type of introduction. Just cold calling is very difficult to take that call. So I'm sure there's more to it.
Has anybody ever taken a cold call on the panel? Zero, right? So I think we can come to one agreement at least that don't cold call. You know, Chuck, you were described earlier a certain center of excellence that you're developing internally with respect to assisting other family offices outside of the traditional healthcare megas. I'm sure that there's interest in terms of contacting you, okay? But if I send you a pitch deck, okay, are you personally going to be reviewing this information?
Probably not, because what we're doing is we're actually rebuilding the ecosystem. So we're doing a totally different thing. We will get to doing some investments, but I think it's important to rebuild the ecosystem. And the ecosystem is really broken in our view. First off, as a family office, we're going from the traditional type of investing. We manage money for institutional investors. We're going to the family office model where we're setting up a holding company in Switzerland where we will be, if we see something that we can invest in that has good cash flow, why would we ever sell it? And we're actually restructuring one of our existing companies with a fellow family office that's $1 billion healthcare company. Again, that's the attitude we're going in. And so we have a very different time frame than the venture capitalists. Now, when we talk to entrepreneurs, and we're working on a couple of very special situations right now, the entrepreneurs just love the idea because they don't want to sell to a venture capitalist that's going to flip it in 4 or 5 years. They want to know that if they're successful and they do the right job, they can stay on. And we want to have them as partners. So it's a total rethink in terms of the way we invest. And what we're finding out is that people just don't know each other. I mean, I've been in places like Singapore, and the people in Singapore in healthcare don't know each other. I was in Brisbane. There were 18 people around the table. Brisbane is not a large city. You know, the chief science officer from Queensland and a lot of other people, they introduced themselves around the table and said, okay, outside of Chuck, if someone met someone new today, all the hands go up. This is a small town. How can people in healthcare not know each other? But that's the way it is. So it's going to take a while as the industry structure rebuilds. So I'm stepping back and I'm looking at how do we rebuild the structure so that the structure actually works.
Well, I'd like to kind of echo your perspective because this is actually something we've been around since '95. So we're kind of dinosaurs in this particular arena, and this is exactly what we found over the course of our conception, that there's the money management aspect, but we're also dealing with a very technical type of a sector. So I'll give you an example. We've created internally an arm called Calawood Labs, whereby it's a center of excellence. We have a data lab in that particular team where they do all the big data analytics. So when we have a project coming on board, a new startup project, you guys really don't have a lot of long-term expertise in analyzing large-scale data sets. So we have that capability that we add in addition to capital to specific projects. Also, internally for us, we use that as a tool when we do vetting. Looking at different projects on a very technical basis requires a certain level of expertise, that maybe an MBA does not have. In fact, I would agree that many MBAs don't have the level of expertise. So I think that one of the differentiating factor between family offices not only resides in our longer term view, but also by having a longer term view, we're able to justify introducing technical expertise to support a broader set of projects. And I think that the issue is, for me, at least my perspective, is that it's not that I do not know people in Brisbane. There's a diversity in terms of level of expertise associated with each family office. That's not all it is. Okay? So they cannot justify hiring a full-time data scientist to analyze genomic information and then advise the decision makers whether or not this particular project is better than that particular project.
Right. I think there's a differentiation that you ought to point out here. For example, the group that we're dealing with is a billion-dollar billionaire that we're working with. Family offices often don't hire enough people, and so the guy is overwhelmed, and so he asks us to take the lead because we know how to make investments. Because I'm what's called a hybrid. I've done the traditional investing, I do family office investing. They're two different languages, like French and English. French actually is my second language, so I'm used to speaking French, but it's two different languaes. And the family offices that are really serious about investing will have actually hired typically some people from the private equity world so that they can speak the language that everyone's used to. If you find people you're not speaking the language to, you're not going to get the funding. I can pretty much assure you of that. You got to find someone that understands the traditional way of funding, but then can translate it into the way family offices think. And we're starting to build that network, but no one's going out and built that network. But now we're being able to build it because we work with 18 cities around the globe, 11 of which are in the U.S. And so it's all happening.
Well, I mean, we're not very transparent. So it takes time to evolve into a mutual trust relationship.
Yeah, and I don't mind doing it because I've done a lot of television, I've done a lot of radio, I've been on the Today Show and all that, so I don't mind talking. I'm used to it. But I like to talk, and what we're really focusing also is on lowering the cost of healthcare. Washington's going to do whatever they're going to do. But for example, I'm part of a cohort at Cooper Clinic where over the last 20 years, with 20,000 people, our healthcare costs are 40% lower. Our incidence of Alzheimer's 38% lower. We want to take that to the world. That's one of our themes that we're actually doing, and we're working with some key cities around the world on that right now.
Well, I have a feeling you're going to have a whole lot of folks approaching you after this panel. So, yeah, first. Sherry.
Yeah, so, you know, like I said, I sit on sort of the other side of the spectrum, and I think the difficulty in this particular family office situation is that they aren't versed in healthcare, except from personal experience, and the need to educate on understanding the kinds of risk that are involved in this sector versus the sectors that they were involved with to create their wealth is quite a large disconnect. So I think that one reason why family offices have perhaps traditionally remained behind the scenes or one arm's length away from entrepreneurs per se is that they are not typically comfortable in this particular realm as a direct investment opportunity. I think that's changing. There was a great example with Kite Pharma, which of course was rescued by a family office when the hedge fund wanted to bail, and they did rather well. So, but I think also family offices are beginning to realize and observe the same things that Kevin and Chuck mentioned in terms of the dearth of capital to bring much needed technology in the healthcare space further along the path with a greater level of success. And they're discovering that with the right support, it is possible to invest directly on their own. They don't necessarily need to go through a fund of funds if they're of a certain size and a certain mindset. It depends really, you know, where they are and they're at. And with a first generation fund, they're a little more want to be a little more involved without saying who they are kind of thing, but they don't know enough to even go to a fund-to-fund approach. So there's different challenges, I think, with the scale of the family office and its history of experience.
So in Fox Hill, you are the person making that transition.
Yes, and you know, as I said, I was asked in part because I spent 35 years on the street, so I bring both the analytical skill in this industry as well as the banking experience to understand how to do deals and what an investment should look like.
Okay, so if I send a pitch to you, to your office, are you the one going to be reading it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. At the present, until we get into a sufficient size, I am in the first stop,
Okay.
as we say.
Okay, now Mark, healthcare IT. Okay, a little different from what Sherry is doing. You're about essentially democratizing and innovation, scaling it. And in terms of what you're looking for in a successful candidate, how can I get through your gate?
Well, I think we're a little bit different than these other guys, where we actually want to be found. So we act more like a traditional type venture capital fund. Our family office was founded by a former private equity investor. So that's his business. His business was investing, and all the guys that we've hired are former investors, as opposed to someone that may have founded a construction company or some other kind of big company that's not in the investing world. So we're already speaking that language. As far as digital health was going to get my attention, it's easier than ever to start an app these days or to spin something up. So there's a lot of ideas out there and a lot of pre-revenue tech companies. What's going to get us excited is revenue. You need to show us that you are making traction. I think it's important when you're reaching out to investors. Know what your criteria is before you reach out to them. Because if you're a pre-revenue company, you know that so a person needs $1 million in revenue, it probably doesn't make sense to reach out to us. Or alternatively, if you're halfway there, you might say, hey Mark, I know you've got a $1 million threshold. I'm at $500,000 right now. I'd love to just talk to you for 15 minutes to just start to form that relationship, and I'll keep in touch maybe once a quarter and send you an update. I love that, because once you can watch them progress, they can see them hit their goals that they've set, and now I'm ready to go when they're ready to go, because a lot of times entrepreneurs wait too long before they go out to raise money, and they don't realize how long it's going to take, and then they put themselves in a vulnerable situation. So we like more is better for us, just personally.
Okay, do family offices invest with venture funds or only with family offices? Can you talk about
Okay, I'll repeat the question. Do family offices invest with venture funds? Go ahead.
Yeah, we look for opportunity based on what our strategy is. So we're members of limited partners in several big funds, Carlisle, folks like those. So we also, if there's a deal that we have subject matter expertise, again, my focus is in healthcare commercialization. So if they're looking at acquiring something we would match so that becomes a good fit. So the answer is that depends, right? It's like the first question an accountant tells you, that depends. So those are the textbook responses from college. But we do look at a variety of different things. Ideally, we're trying to connect them. As I said earlier, we're looking at that, and Mark alluded to it, there's this commercialization gap. So we look at how to make the company be commercially ready. And a lot of times we'll look at those because they'll look at an opportunity that's sitting in a company that's underperforming, variety of things, so they can buy it. And one of the gaps we're finding in the marketplace is there's tons of people with money. There's very few people that actually know what to do with the money. And so you have a financial buyer. If I'm working and I'm running the business development for a major medical, I'm going to speak specifically medical device companies for this example, and I'm going to go ahead and sell something to you, and there's an earnout, they're really concerned in your ability to perform post-earnout. And if you're just the financial buyer, you're going to get a great EBITDA, and that EBITDA is going to be based on the earnout, and you can't perform in the earnout, you're now in question. So now they're looking hard at money and the ability to earn out. And again, that's where we kind of fit in that model, if you will, if that makes sense. Hope that answers your question, or just give you a perspective.
We are building out a new ecosystem. I've been doing this since 1978, so we've invested in most of the code out there. And what we'll do is we'll do actually some co-investing. What we're doing with the early stage stuff is that we have the cities, we're helping the cities actually incubate. And so what I would urge, if you, whatever city you're in, if you have a network like in St. Louis, there's a great network. The excitement there on Thursday night when they have all the young people get together and have their venture party, like they get 500 people. Where do you get 500 people like that? They're young people, all kind of under 35. I mean, there's just a lot going on. So if you can get your city, and then you can build into that ecosystem, because the city's group, like the biogenerator in St. Louis, is going to know exactly what's going on and where the opportunity is. So that's going to be a good group to, like Lincoln, I'm just using St. Louis as an example.
I think you asked a really interesting question, because it goes to one of the reasons why there's been this dichotomy between family office investing culture and VC, and right on the top of that list is the time horizon. Family offices have the privilege and the opportunity to choose a time horizon, whatever piques their interest, really. I can name a couple, and here at this table where you have an evergreen viewpoint, and it's a different mindset when you invest with an evergreen viewpoint than when you invest or co-invest against somebody who's got a 3 to 5 year 10x horizon. So, our view is that as family offices become more comfortable direct investing, more of us will work together, most likely with high net worth angels, particularly folks who are corporate cash outs, who bring along an industry or a specialty expertise, but invest as an individual. And if it's unfortunately the size of VCs, that would be sort of apropos to the market areas that we're looking at, are largely gone. So it's really going to be a matter of creating a new, as Chuck said, a new ecosystem where family offices fill that niche that was really largely destroyed in the financial crisis.
Can I just add another factor there? It depends on the stage of investing that you're looking for. If you're looking at the seed stage, or maybe Series A, it takes too much of a hassle to coordinate a consortium for your specific project. So we would prefer to kind of take it on 100% and then incubate it and see where the actual value might be. And then we would go out to some trusted individuals and then form an ecosystem around that. There's also a matter of ego, but quite frankly, that I don't want to necessarily showcase my failures, and I've had many. But so I think it depends on the size and also the stage of investment. For the purposes, I think, of this particular convention, we're looking at really early stages. So we tend to take on 100%.
Just your comment about ego, it's funny, there's an analogy we use, we've never done a bad deal ever, we've only done bad due diligence.
It's always my fault.
Me too.
But, yes, sir.
If a family office has a therapeutic area focus, either because of personal relationship to that disease state or because they have expertise in-house, how do you broadcast it? Because, you say we don't want cold calls, but how does that communication take place?
Okay, how do we communicate? Okay, there's a range here. Okay, Mark on that side likes to talk. I think on the website there's a whole lot of information that you can access. I think that we're fairly transparent, although other people are telling me I'm not. Okay, and then probably on the other extreme I have Kevin here, who doesn't want to talk to anybody.
Fair.
And Chuck wants to be friends with everybody.
I feel like Donald Trump, I got a chance to respond.
There's actually something interesting, and that is that in these cities, the philanthropic arm, like in St. Louis, with biogenerator, we're working with them to build the family offices. They're going to know where to go, and if you work with them, they're the institutional first institutional capital in. And they're doing the due diligence, and they make the due diligence available to family offices, and make them available to the angel investors, and make them available to venture capitalists. One of the venture capitalists in St. Louis has done 14 investments since 2013. 10 of the 14 were vetted by this institutional group that has people that several from the drug. One guy that's leading it is 12 years at Pfizer. I think this is part of the new model that's coming up. It's going to make investment with like Sherry's family a lot easier because you know it's vetted science. You know you've got institutional capital in there. It's not just someone coming in. Because one of the first questions we have is there institutional capital? I can't invest unless there's some institutional capital somewhere. And these accelerators can be the first institutional capital. So it's again a new model that's coming up.
And I can kind of echo that from at least a local environment out where I am in New Jersey. There, the family office community is accessible, if you want to call it that way, through the incubator system in eastern Pennsylvania. As an example, the Doylestown area has the Bucks County incubator, and they hold events there 3 or 4 times a year. And most of those companies are fairly early stage that are backed by individuals or small local family offices to begin with, because they're in the invest at home, we know who you are kind of thing. So that is one way of finding where you might meet the people who are the family office themselves or the people who represent them. Because if you're in a fairly early stage, you are involved with the incubator program. It is where you're finding good opportunities. And it's where a lot of families, ours included, think that you can add value because of the broader business experience that usually family members have in other capacities. It's translatable.
We're beginning to run a little bit shorter time. So I do want to emphasize the aim of this particular panel. It's not to have you in front of a family office. It's to have you get funded by a family office. All right? So let's talk about the decision-making process. Every organization does it differently. So I think it's important to, in terms of finding a fit, to really understand the unique set of circumstances that need to align in each family office for decision number 1 to be made, and number 2 to be made in your favor. Okay? So I'll start on the other side, Mark. Okay, how does your decision-making process work? Is it a decision by committee, or are you the decider when it comes to healthcare?
And so, we're not a big group. We've got maybe 6 individuals, but I'll start it off just saying start early when you're going out to fundraise, because everyone's process takes a different time period. I think we're faster than a lot of other family offices or venture capital firms. So our timeline might be a little quicker than what you might encounter, but it's usually by committee, but everybody on that committee is going to be in the meeting. So when we invite a company to come in, we're going to have everybody in front of that company hearing the pitch, looking at the whites of their eyes, asking them questions, getting up to speed on the company. It's not going to be come in, come back in again, okay, now come pitch to the investment committee. That's not how we operate personally. Some other firms might operate that way. You might encounter a firm where initial phone call, and you come in for a meeting, and then all of a sudden you're doing a bunch of diligence, you're doing a bunch of legal drafting, and they say, come in again and present to my investment committee. It's like, hold on, wait a second. We've spent a bunch of money and it's been 60 days and now I'm presenting. What's happening here? So figuring that out up front, I think, is important to know what the process is. And so versus process, have an initial phone call with you. If you're interested, you can come into our office for a 2-hour meeting. If you're interested after that, you can submit a term sheet. We sign that term sheet, and then it takes probably 45 days to close. So from beginning to end, you're looking at 60 to kind of 90 days. I think that's on the quicker side.
That's assuming that they have a pre-established relationship with you.
Yeah.
Okay. So if I'm just coming off the street and I'm pitching for money because I got a month left in my burner.
Not a good spot to be. It's vulnerable, very vulnerable spot.
Okay, so start forming a relationship early. Sherry?
Yeah, this for new offices is a difficult subject to get your hands around to start off with. So because we're starting out of the gate with a finite amount of resource, we've actually wanted to instill some measure of discipline in the process and also account for the fact that we don't have a lot of internal resources, since it's mostly on my shoulders. So our approach is that I have a fairly specific profile of investments which I share when I meet with companies. And then after my initial touch, I will do a fair amount of background on the science, because most of our mandate is related to innovative science. And then I have, from my banking world, I have a scoring system that I use to rate the opportunities according to merits of the science, and that might include peer-reviewed journals, it might include breadth of patent estate or stage patents, it might include the experience of the entrepreneur. Then I have a financial score based on their capitalization and what they've done in terms of money raising to that point. And then an operations score in terms of the entrepreneur's ability either to handle the business at the current state or to assess for the infrastructure that's going to be needed to support him. And accumulate a number of these until I get a number that hit the threshold score, and then present summaries to the family members, and then they get to cogitate on it for a while and say, yes, we want to go further on this one, or that one. So our process is probably going to be somewhat longer than the others, because it really is going to be on an individual company basis by the family members ultimately. But the idea is to give them opportunities that I feel fairly confident, if it hits the emotional chord, and I'll use that in quotes, that they would be comfortable with the rest of what would have to be done about it.
We have two different ways of doing it. We have a partnership with another major family office that has sold companies for as much as $15 billion. And we have a track that we're really focused on, particularly in lowering healthcare through preventative medicine, that we're following, and we're looking at telemedicine. So those are the two areas that we're actually looking at right now. We have a separate set of funds that we manage, which is really co-investment only with institutional capital. So if there's, you have to have an institutional capital, an institutional lead before we can invest. So that's just the way we're set up. One of the guys in our analytical team managed $8 billion for a major pension fund, and so we bring that kind of discipline to the party.
So in our world, we kind of have two worlds. We have the macro and micro. So one of the things I want to comment is when you said about not being open, we're absolutely open. How we find companies is becoming things like this, and like Kenny's here from AVIMED and those folks in the MedTech conference is another great place where we find companies like you. But what we look at is two rationales, and the way to go investing is when you reference emotional attachment to these deals. I've never seen a good deal that I didn't like. It's like I want to find a pony to ride around here somewhere. So you go into those very emotional, but we balanced out by having portfolio rationalization of percentages we're going to invest in sectors at times. The only thing that offsets that, as I said earlier, if we're in the middle of a deal and we've got a complementary bolt-on product category that may not even be through the FDA process yet, but we already have a channel, that's going to be pure margin business, that becomes extremely attractive and appealing, and that will accelerate. So how we go through our process is we're going to come to a company because we're already way down the path, and how quickly to disengage in a process if you don't know your stuff. We're going to check your references, check all those things. We're going to make those phone calls. We're going to call the partners that we're dealing with. So if it's one of these folks, there's a phone call back and forth, and they can basically thumb up or thumb down an entrepreneur, especially from a coaching perspective. It's probably one of the greatest challenges. So we'll go through that process. Then at the end of the process, I actually, and the unfortunate guy gets to sign the check, so I get shot or thanked whenever it's done. But usually it's the process with the macro perspective and the portfolio rationalization is critical. So we allocate resources based on that. So at that moment, we might be in the diagnostic space, but then if there's a diagnostic deal going on in addition to that, we'll complement that, and that deal might accelerate a lot more than normal.
So it's more than a Ouija board. And our time is almost up, and I did promise you guys time for questions. So, sir.
With all due respect, Kevin, I'm sorry, just but incubator companies are the hardest to find institutional investors for. And if you're looking for institutional investors before you invest in incubator companies, I don't think you're going to find very many. Venture capital is growing
We find
more and more for the later stage, and less and less for the early
Right,
stage.
you're absolutely correct, and that's why we use philanthropic dollars, and that's why we're doing stuff in St. Louis, which is institutional capital, taking it right off the laboratory bench. So that is institutional capital, and that counts. That's where we're going. Because it gets ready for the for-profit, because there's a dearth of financing the for-profit as we mapped this healthcare around the globe. That's what we found.
I think it's kind of an interesting point. One of the things we're seeing with those is that becomes an economic development play. I, as a philanthropic company, own the buildings, so I'm getting tenants. So it's kind of, my model's actually different. So it's an interesting perspective.
So sharing to your comment on looking for good science and publications, do you rely on data coming out of one lab, or are you looking for independent validation?
That's a very good question, and I can tell you that both from my analytical experience and my banking experience, I would say that the probability of single lab data being validated independently is usually pretty low. And that's one reason why I look at peer-reviewed journals and look at where else that science has been validated. This is an increasingly common problem, and it's a lot of these technologies that are sort of single-sourced have entered into the public marketplace and been one of the causes for a lot of clinical failures. So it is important, since our fund has a focus on clinical trial efficiency, we want to make sure that there's some external validation of that single lab's work before we would commit to it.
Any other questions? Time is almost up, I think.
Yeah.
And thank you very much, panel, for your insights and your time. Let the mad onrush